About to enter the holiday season. The traffic is already picking it up. We could call it the great holiday migration. It's going to be underway with millions of people that'll be traveling to see their loved ones, their family, their friends, and they'll be visiting by airplane. But a bunch of them are going to get a big surprise when they head to the airline ticket counter or try to check in online and face a blizzard of what the airlines call ancillary fees. For years, many of us on the Commerce Committee have been pushing the Department of Transportation to adopt rules that would require a standardized disclosure statement for common airline fees. Things like bag fees, change and cancellation fees, priority boarding, and seating fees. So if you compare this to when you go to apply for a credit card, there's a box on the back of the application that shows you the annual fee of the credit card, the interest rate, and any other fees. Consumers have this so they can compare adequate data to adequate data. We like to call it comparing apples to apples. And therefore, the consumer can know what it is that they're looking for and choose the credit card that they want. So it's a common sense solution in the airline business that you would want to do for consumers to make sense of all those different fees on an airline ticket. Well, there was some progress on this earlier in the year when the Department of Transportation proposed a rule to require airlines to disclose bag fees to consumers when they purchase the ticket. Last week, however, the White House directed the Department of Transportation, the administration did this for all of those holiday travelers on airlines. They put a big lump of coal in their Christmas stocking when they abruptly canceled that proposed rule of the Department of Transportation that you were going to know what those fees were up front at the purchase of the ticket. And then, along with another rule that would have required airlines to tell the public how much money that the airline is charging from all the other ancillary fees. Those proposed rules were withdrawn. Well, that's just not in the interest of the traveling public. That's not in the interest of consumers. And it should not be any skin off the airline's back to just show what the fees are up front so the consumer understands that. Indeed, a new revenue source for the airlines is to have these additional charges. That's not what this senator is arguing with, as long as those fees are properly and clearly disclosed. So let me give you another example. Last year, on the FAA bill that we passed into law, it required the Department of Transportation to implement two basic rules to protect airline customers. Two very simple rules. The first was that if you've checked a bag and therefore you've returned to the airline a certain amount of money to check that bag, and what happens if your bag doesn't arrive, or if it's delayed beyond a certain number of hours, shouldn't the airline at least refund that fee that you paid for that bag to be delivered in a timely fashion? Well, it's a pretty simple concept. If you pay $50 for a checked bag, you expect it to arrive with you. And if it doesn't, you should get an automatic refund. That's common sense. But the Department of Transportation hasn't done anything on that, and it's in the law. It's in the law that we passed last year. Give you another example. The second requirement that we put in last year's FAA bill is that airlines, when they seat children 13 or under, they put them adjacent to a parent or an older sibling traveling with them. And so the Department of Transportation earlier in the year designed a rule to ensure that parents would not have to fork over money for a preferred seat just to be able to sit next to their child. The Department of Transportation was supposed to have finalized both of these rules by July of this year. But to date, they've done nothing. And consumers traveling during the holidays are going to have the experience if your bag doesn't show. Since the rule hadn't been put in place by the Department of Transportation, even though it is the law that was passed last year, what's going to happen? Passengers with delayed bags will be losing out on the money that they paid to check their bag, even if it doesn't get to them in a timely fashion. And what's going to happen to the parent with the underage child? They're going to be boarding planes wondering if they will be able to beg someone to give up their seat just to sit next to their child, even though that may be a preferred seat. In other words, a seat that costs more money. And just about everyone else will be left playing airline fee roulette, not knowing what the new fee is that they are going to have to pay just to get the basic service. It's so common sense. Why do we have to fight about this? We're not arguing that the airline doesn't have the right to charge the fee. We just want it disclosed to the person that is purchasing that ticket. And it doesn't have to be the way that it is now, because consumers should have a right to know ahead of time what they're paying. And then they can compare options. When an airline charges a fee for a service, if they fail to deliver that service, passengers ought to get their money back. This is called basic fairness. But that's not what we're seeing out there. So, Mr. President, I want to urge the leadership of the Department of Transportation, Secretary Chow and her staff, to really go ahead and implement those two regulations that emanate from the law that we pass, and to do it quickly. And I want to urge the Department of Transportation to treat airline passengers like they ought to be treated, which is valued customers during this holiday season as in every season. Mr. President, I would yield the floor.